and we will circulate a copy of the recording and the slides by email next week. And my colleague Chanel will also be adding a copy of the slides into the chat now, just in case anybody likes to open those up and be able to zoom in and out during the session. I'm not expecting any fire alarms or other sudden background noise where I am, but please do keep an ear out for this where you are. And just remember that this is a safe space. Please respect one another and your speakers when commenting in the chat and asking questions. We'd like you to use the chat today for any comments or reflections that you might have, but please do use the Q&A function, which you can find in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, to add any questions that you have for our speaker today. And you can also upvote questions. So if you see a question from another attendee that you'd also like to know the answer to, then you can give that a thumbs up, and I know that that's an important question. We might not be able to answer every question today, and we won't be getting into sort of individual issues during the Q&A, but we'll do our best to get through the questions we have, and we'll be making a note of all the questions that you've submitted to inform some further communication from the Fundraising Regulator. And next slide, please. So just a quick run through of our agenda today. I'm nearly done with my welcome, and then I will be able to hand you over to Connor Gibson from the Fundraising Regulator for a presentation, followed by plenty of time for Q&A, and then some signposting at the end before we try to close promptly at 1:15. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, for anyone who is unfamiliar with us, we are NCVO. That's the National Council for Voluntary Organisations. We are the largest network for charities in England, and we're proud to represent and support over 17,000 voluntary organisations of all sizes. I'm sure we've got a variety of groups on the call today, and we'll find out about that in just a second. But that's from the very biggest household name charities to the smallest community groups. But at your heart, you've all got the aim of making the world around you a better place. And of course, we'd love you to join us. Next slide, please. Chanel's put a link in the chat as well. But just to make a note here that by becoming a member of NCVO, you can save time and money. As a member, you get access to information and guidance, downloadable tools, discounted training with a 30% discount, and much more. And just a reminder that if you're a small charity with an income under £30,000, membership is free. And we do also have a special 50% off offer for small charities in honour of Small Charity Week that we can put in the chat and follow-up email as well. Next slide. Okay, so why are we here? Why are we doing this webinar? I mean, we know that for many small charities and voluntary organisations, things are tough right now. Demand continues to increase whilst operational costs rise, alongside growing concerns about decreased grant funding and reduced public giving. Many of you might be thinking about diversifying your income streams or exploring new fundraising methods. And so it's essential that this is underpinned by legal, open, honest, and respectful fundraising. So this session will outline the new Code of Fundraising Practice or the changes to the code and how it differs from the previous version, and should help you to understand what you need to do to prepare for the new code. Connor will give an update on the guidance that's going to be coming from the Fundraising Regulator. So with this in mind, we'd love to find out a little more about our attendees today, and we'd be grateful if you could answer the 4 questions that should pop up on your screen about now. Chanel, please, to find out a bit more about your organisation and your fundraising practice. So there are 4 questions there, so if you make sure to scroll down and answer all of those, that would be brilliant. And I'll just give it a bit of time. If you can't see the poll, there should be an option to open it from the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. It looks like everybody's getting involved now, which is great. Really interesting to see. So we're asking you about the size of your organization and who's representing your organization on the call today, as well as a little bit about your current fundraising practices and whether you're registered with the Fundraising Regulator. I'm just going to give it a little bit more time because it would be great to get a full picture of who's here today with us. We're still going. There's lots of you here today. And I know that some people won't fit neatly into the options given, but please do share in the chat if your role is not one of those listed. And I know that if you're here representing a small charity, you probably wear many hats, as I know well myself. Okay, I think we'll. Oh, people still going. All right, we'll leave it there if we could just end the poll and just share those results. Chanel, everyone should be able to see those, I think. So you can see that, interestingly, the biggest group of organizations here are on the larger end. And we've got 10% CEOs here, 39% fundraising manager or the lead fundraising person in the organization, followed by 16% who are fundraising officer and other paid roles as well. And we've got a real variety of fundraising methods undertaken by those on the call. Overwhelmingly, 87% of you do engage with grant funding, and 75% of you engage with online donation platforms. We will make sure to kind of share these results around afterwards as well. And in terms of who is registered with the Fundraising Regulator, we've got 59% of people here said yes, 20% said no, and 22% said they don't know. All right. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to your speaker today with the next slide, please, to Connor.
Thanks, Amy. So I'll just quickly introduce myself. I use he, him. I'm a white man with dark hair and an approximation of a beard. I'm wearing a blue shirt today, and as slideshows, I'm the policy manager at the Fundraising Regulator. So if we go into my full slides, I'll just explain what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to take you through the sort of the consultation process, how we redrafted the code, show you some examples of what the new rules look like, and then tell you what you should do next. But before we get into that, because there is a range of sizes of organizations and expertise and understanding, I thought it would be useful to talk more generally about the code itself and what it does and what it's for. So the code and the standards within it kind of underpin the voluntary self-regulatory system that is is managed by the Fundraising Regulator. The codes and standards apply to all charitable, philanthropic, and benevolent fundraising activity carried out in the UK. And our rules are based around these core values that Amy's already alluded to, that fundraising should be legal, so in line with the law. It should be open, so it should be transparent about what you're fundraising for and how you're doing it and willing to explain it. That it should be honest, so you shouldn't mislead people by leaving information out or by giving a false impression of what you're raising the money for or what the project is that the money is going to go towards, and that it should be respectful not just of the people who you interact with, but also the spaces that you interact with whenever you're conducting fundraising. So as we'll see in the next slide, we've got a timeline of how the code review process worked. It was an exhaustive and extensive process that started in the autumn of 2022 with a call for information where which resulted in us speaking to mostly larger charities and infrastructure bodies, so people who would have a picture of the whole code and how how the rules apply in a range of different contexts. And we wanted to get their perspective on how they think the code could be improved, what works, what doesn't. And they were generally in agreement that there was room to improve and streamline the code. They considered that the idea of moving towards more principles and away from prescriptive rules would be beneficial, and also that the way that information about legal obligations is presented in the current code, the 2019 code, could be improved. So we took on board those suggestions, and then we developed a whole range of proposals for a full sector consultation in autumn of 2023, where we set out for every single one of the 430 odd rules in the 2019 code. Should we remove it? Should we revise it? Or should we retain it? And we got insight. We got almost 700 submissions to the forms that we put there, 150,000 words of feedback that we reviewed, and we used that insight to redraft the code. And then once the code was redrafted, we took it out for another consultation in the autumn of 2024, asking people to comment specifically on what the new rules said, how they thought they were practical, whether they thought they were practical, whether they thought there were limitations or possible inconsistencies that they identified. We used the feedback from those respondents, slightly less than the first consultation because it was shorter, but still around 100,000 words of feedback on those rules, some of which fortunately was just people saying very good and we agree with this. But we used that to come up with the final draft of the code, which we launched a few weeks ago at the end of April. And we're currently in the 6-month implementation period, which I'll talk about in detail at the end of the presentation, with the new code coming into force on the 1st of November. So we'll see in the next slide, it's just to let you know what our redrafting process was. So as I say, we had a really substantial volume of responses from the many phases of the consultation, and we also so we reviewed all the consultation feedback. Human beings read every single word of what was sent. I was one of those human beings, and we considered what was the basis of people's challenges, if they provided some extra evidence to support their response, if it was partly that it was their interpretation that had led to their conclusion, and so we could actually reframe the rule to avoid that interpretation. There's a lot more detail on this in a document that we put out alongside the new code, which is our consultation response summary, and it kind of shows what our working was and what was behind it. So if you're interested in that, you can read more on it. We also engaged with wider stakeholders, so that includes sector bodies, the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, Charity Retail Association, charity law bodies, all sorts of people who've got real detailed knowledge of the issues at hand. And we spoke to other regulatory bodies who have an overlap with fundraising activities. So whether that's the Information Commissioner's Office, the Advertising Standards Authority, Gambling Commission, DCMS, we spoke to all those bodies to make sure that we weren't developing rules that could potentially contradict what their expectations were, and that we could make sure that we were directing people to the right places when we were saying, you can get advice on this from the ICO, or you can get insight on this from the Gambling Commission. All the decisions that we made along the way, the whole process, the developing the proposals, the rewriting the code, was approved by our board and our committees, specifically our standards committee. And both the board and the committees have practitioner expertise on there. We have members who are current and recent fundraisers on the ground, and also fundraising managers or senior people in organizations that fundraise. And on our standards committee, we also have observers from the Chartered Institute of Fundraising and the Scottish Fundraising Adjudication Panel. So everything that we were doing was getting seen by people who know how fundraising works and can understand what the implications would be of those rules. Then once we'd settled on the new code, we made sure it went through a full comprehensive legal review, as I mentioned, wanting to make sure that we don't set a standard that in order to meet our rule, you have to break the law, that kind of thing. There's make sure that there's no issues there where there's a conflict between our regulations and the law. And we also, same to the 2019 code, we went through the full Crystal Mark accreditation process with the Plain English campaign. So the new code will be as clear and as accessible to as wide an audience as possible, just as the previous code was. So on the next slide, we'll see some of the key changes, what's different in the code. So as I've alluded to a bit, and as I'll show you in some examples, we took out a lot of rules that cover legal requirements. There was a whole section on data protection, section 3 in the 2019 code, where large chunks of it were rules where we put the word must in bold to indicate that it related to the law, and we spelt out these are the things that you have to do to meet the standards of for data protection. But sometimes nuance is lost whenever we try and reframe that into a plain English format to fit into our code. And also the legislation gets updated and then we've still got our old code and we need to go out and consult on the rule changes. So we determined that by taking that information out of the rules part of the code, some of it is retained, and I'll show you how it is retained, we could actually remove a significant number of the rules that were in there because they were reflecting information about what the law says that is useful for fundraisers, but isn't actually within our powers to regulate. And we could falsely give the impression that if you have a concern about somebody selling data or somebody running an illegal lottery, that we're the people to address that, when in fact that would be the Information Commissioner's Office for the data, the Gambling Commission for the lotteries. We didn't just take things out. We obviously added some new things in. I'm going to go through each of these new rules later on in the presentation, but we have a rule explaining how you can engage appropriately with the fundraising regulator to keep the system running smoothly. A rule on protecting fundraisers from harm and harassment, which was an area of particular interest, and rules on staff collections. So that's kind of situations where you're asking for donations, but there isn't a fundraiser present. So often the donor can't get more information if they want more information, if they want to find out exactly what, how the charity works or what the funds are going to be used for. But in spite of the small number of new rules, the overwhelming weight was towards streamlining. So there are actually 70% fewer rules in the new code than there were in the previous code, around 130 in the new code versus around 430 in the previous code. And it's almost half the length, so it's 45% fewer words in there. So hopefully it's a lot easier to read and digest to a much wider range of readers, and also a huge array of organizations are subject to this code, not just those that are able to have a fundraising compliance manager or a whole team of people working just on events fundraising or something like that. So on the next slide, we see there's also the supporting documents that accompanied the launch of the new code. One of the most useful ones for people who are already familiar with the 2019 code will be the table of changes. It shows you how the old rules map on to the new principles-based system and the new rules. So if you know that you need, when you're running an event, you need to look at rule 11.2.1 of the new code, of the old code, you can say, well, how is that requirement covered in the new code? Is it covered by a principle? Is it kept exactly the same? Has it actually been removed because it doesn't reflect best practice anymore? I'd also mention the consultation summary document, which is going to be useful for people who want to get their head around exactly why we did what we did, not just what did we do. And probably the most significant for a lot of you will be these code support guides, which are a new approach that we've taken to setting out compliance approaches to make you understand how the principles-based rules will apply. Essentially what they are is they're guidelines, but they're not checklists. It's not saying these are all the things that you must do, or these are the only things that you can do in order to do due diligence in fundraising, or to monitor your fundraising partners, or to document your fundraising decisions. But it is a useful guide for you to understand the sort of things that you may do depending on the context in which you're fundraising, we don't expect that every organization of every size will meet every requirement set out in the code support guides. And we also are conscious that what's appropriate and what's relevant will depend on the size and the scale and the nature of the activity that you're doing. One of the key themes that comes out of the 3 guides that you can see there, due diligence, monitoring partnerships, and documenting decisions, is risk. So a lot of it is about understanding what the risks are and making sure that you've taken steps to mitigate those risks, rather than that you will not, this is prohibited or that is prohibited, or this must always be done or that must never be done. And it does also link in quite a bit with another topic that comes up quite often, which is fundraising partnerships, working with often non-charitable organizations who are providing services and making sure that they're the right organization to work with through due diligence, monitoring that ongoing relationship and having a level of monitoring that's appropriate to the scale and complexity of the fundraising that they're doing, and also keeping a record of how those decisions have been made and how you've come to a conclusion about what the best approach would be. So we see then on the next slide, just a quick explanation of, well, what is a principles-based rule, or what's the purpose of the principles-based rules? A large aspect of it is sort of future-proofing, to set out standards and expectations that are applicable to a whole range of different scenarios. You'll see this when I get onto the examples, but it essentially means that we don't need to have a rule for each different fundraising approach. We don't need to have a set of rules that apply when you're asking for people on the street for direct debits compared to when you're asking people in the street for cash donations. We can have a general principle that applies to how you should behave or what information you should provide in those contexts. And as a result of that, we've got a significantly streamlined code because we have fewer of those prescriptive rules. The future-proofing thing particularly is that if there's a new method that approaches, if there's a change to how fundraising is done, we saw it a lot with the lockdowns in COVID. A lot of people moved to having remote events, and we didn't have any specific rules on remote events. But if we have a principle that applies to how you should act in all fundraising contexts, then you can think, well, how would I be respectful, or how would I be address people saying that they don't want you to continue talking to them about fundraising? You're empowered as a fundraiser to apply that principle to a new context, rather than waiting for us to produce new guidance, or which can take some time, or new rules which can take even longer, which is, as I've explained, has been a 3-year process of putting together these new rules. But we shouldn't need to do that so much in the future. Although there's been big changes, there is a lot of continuity. Essentially, the protections, particularly for the public, that are in the 2019 code are retained in the 2025 code, but they're framed in the context of principles. So we've retained a lot of those protections, and by framing them differently and by presenting them in a less restrictive manner, we've actually extended some of the protections. So although there are fewer rules, existing and potential donors are covered by just as many, arguably more protections than they were under the current code. And if there's concern about some of the rules being very obtuse and wide, a lot of them are actually accompanied by non-exhaustive lists of examples of things that you must always do or things that you should never do in the context, and how you can actually meet the standards set out in the principle. But they're always presented as these are potential approaches, rather than these are the only things you must do, or these are the these are the only ways that you can meet that principle. There is room within the principles-based system for you to demonstrate through that your activity has actually met a principle, even if it doesn't necessarily tick all the boxes listed in the bullet points. So we'll now move through to the actual examples, which is kind of the meat of the presentation here. So the first example on the first slide, we'll see, don't worry, you don't need to see the detail of these side-by-side slides, because the next slide will zoom in. I'll get onto that in a second. But what we have here is 4 rules in the 2019 code on the left-hand side that relate to aspects of being reasonable about how you persuade people to give money, or the ways in which you might intrude upon their everyday life. So it's in like 3 different subsections of the code. It's spread out all over the place. You can't just look in one place and find all you need. It's worth pointing out that there is one specific example here. You may not be able to read it, but I'll read it out for you. But in the old code, Rule 1.1.2 required that you must be polite at all times. And we considered, based on feedback that we'd received and also our own considerations, that actually that is a standard that we don't think belongs in our code, because there's a risk that that standard means that fundraisers are not able to respond appropriately to inappropriate behavior that they experience. And so we've actually taken out that requirement because we were concerned that it could contradict with what our expectations are around fundraisers being able to address inappropriate behavior and basically maintain their own dignity whilst working, rather than having to be blankly polite while someone is being inappropriate towards them. That the rule had not been used for that purpose. I should be clear. We had not investigated under that rule, but there was a concern that the existence of that rule could create a problem in the future. And so instead, if we zoom in on the next slide, we'll see that there's a principle, which is that you should take all reasonable steps to ensure your fundraising is conducted in a way that reflects positively on fundraising in general. So there's a lot of behavior that could fall into that category of not reflecting positively on fundraising in general. But we do want to be clear about some of these specific things that might be included in that. So that's not unreasonably intruding or placing undue pressure or being unreasonably persistent. And then we also say that there's this specific requirement that you should accept a request to end an interaction. And this is a good example of where principles can apply across a whole range of contexts. So whether you are talking to somebody face to face in the street, whether you're talking to them at a stall, at an event, whether you're talking to them on the phone, whether you've gone and knocked on the door, you should accept a request to end an interaction. We don't need a separate rule for each of those contexts. We have a general rule that says specifically that you should accept a request to end an interaction about fundraising. And that should be clear and understandable across a whole range of contexts and across any potential new contexts, new approaches, whatever it may be. The next example in the next slide, again, we'll be zooming in so you don't need to see the detail here, but what we have on the left is about almost 200 words of rules, 5 rules in total. And they all use the bold must approach, which means they all relate to legal requirements. They outline aspects of legal obligations for specifically charity trustees, so people who are subject to aspects of the Charities Act, to act in the best interest of the charitable institution, to deal with conflicts of interest, to make sure that assets are used appropriately. But what we are able to do with the new approach is to make so one aspect of that is we want to take out rules that relate to laws that we're not responsible for. So we're not responsible for enforcing the Charities Act, the Charity Commission are. However, this is a very important issue for trustees and in relation to fundraising activity. So we wanted to have a rule that related specifically to the aspects of working in the best interest of a charity that are within our remit, which are specifically related to fundraising. So if we click through, we'll see the new rule in detail. And it lays out that you must be able to show that you have acted in the best interests of your charitable institution when fundraising. So we're not tying this to the legislation. We're not saying you must meet the standards set out in the Charities Act if you are a trustee of a registered charity. We're saying that whether you're a registered charity, an exempt charity, a social enterprise, CIC, you must be able to show that you've acted in the best interest of your institution when fundraising. So that's a big difference there. But also we have done again, we've included some specifics to accompany it, non-exhaustive specifics, such as identifying and dealing with conflicts of interest, making sure donations are used for the purposes they're given for, and being clear that fundraisers have to get the donations to your charitable institution. So making sure that that works appropriately. There's a lot of other areas that we might consider if if we have concerns that somebody has not been acting in the best interest of their charitable institution beyond the 3 bullets that we have there. But we thought it was particularly useful for fundraisers and for the public, for donors, for any other readers, to be able to see what the some of the real specific important headline expectations are. And none of this is specifically tied to legislation. That's not to say we don't think it's useful for our readers to know this information. So alongside this rule, there is a link to a page on our website which summarizes the key legal responsibilities of trustees under the Charities Act. So the old rule attempted to take that information and turn it into a you must format plain English rule basis. But instead, what we've done is we've set out our own expectations and we've linked to where you can find more information about the most relevant stuff there. So I'll move on to the last of these examples with a little bit of an eye on time. These are the rules in the old code that relate to training volunteers. There's a lot of overlap here. Some of the rules relate to only on behalf of volunteers, which are volunteers where you have some control over their activity. Maybe if you're running an event, you're putting on an event and they're the person who's working the cash desk or doing the fundraising activity at the event. You've got to train them in a certain way. And other rules relate to an in aid of volunteer who is, say, somebody who's running a marathon has picked your charity and the first you hear about it is whenever you get the money from them. So you can't really give them that much training in those contexts. But yeah, we've gone from multiple rules across several sections of the volunteers thing to, if we click through the single rule, which itself is only about 20 words long, front and center of the volunteers section, being clear that this is a significant topic with regards to volunteers, and it sets out that you must provide in aid of and on behalf of volunteers with training and support that's appropriate to the relationship they have with you. So the rule itself, the principle there is just make sure that they can get access to appropriate training and support in relation to the relationship they have with you. It then outlines for the on behalf of volunteers, the ones where you have a greater amount of involvement in their activity. You want to make sure that they know how to fundraise legally and safely, how to handle and process donations, what should or shouldn't be included in fundraising materials, and also just more general stuff about how they should behave during the fundraising activity and where they can find some more support and guidance. There's an understanding that, as I said, you might first hear about somebody's in aid of fundraising after the money's arrived in your bank account, so you can't really do a lot of training there. But the explanatory text underneath specifically says that if you become aware of an in aid of volunteers fundraising activity beforehand, you must take reasonable steps to make sure that they use the expression in aid of, so it's clear that what they're doing is different from your own activity. Make it clear that they're responsible for all of it because you have not had any hands-on involvement in this. They can't assume that you're going to help them with the promotion. They can't assume that they're covered by your liabilities insurance. Just be very clear to them that they're responsible for all that, and direct them to where they can find information about fundraising legally and safely. So that's the last of these examples, I believe, and we'll just go on to the next one. This is just explaining how we've taken rules that cover a lot of aspects of the law and reframed them under the new code. So these rules in the old code all relate to gift aid. There's about 300 words split across 2 sections. Each one of them has the bold must somewhere, which indicates that there's some law that applies, but it's not exactly clear what law applies. But if we skip on to the next slide, we'll see that under the new code, we've kept the relevant information, but we haven't made it a rule. So this is not a rule. This is just boxed out information. It's significantly shorter than what you would have seen before, and it spells out that what gift aid is, that it allows you to reclaim tax on donations from UK taxpayers and increase the amount of donation. It explains who is actually responsible for it. So to say HMRC is the lead statutory body for tax matters, including gift aid, and then to link you to the most useful guidance. We've taken this approach for several areas where there is information about the law that's specifically relevant to fundraising. We've retained it within the code, but we haven't used it as a rule. So things like including benefits with donations, getting marketing consent under GDPR, that sort of thing has been retained. And I'll just finish the examples now with a few of the new rules that we'll see. The first one is the one that I had alluded to previously about protecting fundraisers from harm and harassment. So this is a topic that's of significant interest in the time since we've been conducting the code review, and in recent weeks there's been stories about fundraisers facing harm or well-being concerns whilst fundraising. And so we understand that a body like ours and a code like ours can't stop it from happening, but we can have an expectation that there's attempts to address and potentially mitigate potential harms. So the rule sets out that you must take reasonable steps to protect fundraisers from harm and harassment while fundraising, and then includes the specifics that will be having a process for fundraisers to raise any issues that arise, and taking steps to address those issues as they're reported. The other rule beside it is a less glamorous rule, but a very important one. It plays quite an important part in an effective self-regulatory system, and it sets out that you should respond constructively and within an appropriate time to inquiries that you receive from the FR or the Scottish Fundraising Panel about keeping to the code, and you should make sure that your fundraising partners do the same. This is something that a lot of self-regulatory bodies have in place, and essentially it's a rule that allows us to say, if you're not responding to our comments or you're not providing information as we asked for it, we could say, actually, you've broken our code just by not engaging constructively, let alone all the other concerns that we have. There's a breach there, and there's a possibility for us to take some regulatory action if we see fit. It's worth saying this isn't just something that we've added in and we'll decide what constructive is. This is accompanied by a specific document that explains how you should engage constructively with the fundraising regulator, what our timeframes are, what we'll send to you, what we expect back. So it's definitely something to bear in mind, but it's something that probably for the vast majority of you on this call will never ever come up. It's only in the context of where we've got a concern about a breach. The last couple of examples I'll show you now. These relate to unstaffed collections. So it's a slightly clumsy term, but it was the best we could come up with for where there isn't a fundraiser present, or where there often isn't a fundraiser present. And so there's a certain amount of information that should be provided. Sort of convenience giving tools are often unstaffed, not always, but so some of the most common things you would see would be tap to donate machine, or a QR code that you can scan to donate, or a text to donate function, also roundups on supermarket tills, things like that, and donation points that are unstaffed. So that will include charity collection bags and also charity donation points, the collection bins. This is essentially trying to set out a baseline level of information that has to be provided in all these contexts, so that people can make an informed decision about where they want to give their donation. And that's also will mean that there's a kind of level playing field for all types. So people won't think, well, I can use this type because I can get away with providing less information. I don't need to be as detailed about where the money is going to go to if I use this type of fundraising approach than if I use that approach. And the baseline information is, unfortunately, the bullets have gone a bit strange there, but which is my fault. You have to make sure that before making a donation, donors can see clear, accurate, and up-to-date information about the collection. So that's specifically the name of the charitable institution and their registration information and contact details. And in the context where there's a third-party collector, that's most often the case in things like charity collection bags, details of how those partners will be paid, and also contact details for the collector if they're different. The accompanying rule is some additional information that should also be made available, but doesn't necessarily have to be right there at the point of donation. So you should make sure that donors can easily find information about processing fees involved in the donation, and any secondary purpose the donation may be used for. A classic example of a secondary purpose is if you need £50,000 to fix the church roof, what happens if you only raise £40,000? What happens to the money then? Or what happens if you raise £80,000? What happens to the extra money? One of the best ways to avoid that becoming a problem is to say upfront when people give the money, here is what we will do if we either do not meet or exceed the target. And this, in the particular context of things like QR codes, tap to donate, this rule 7.5.2 has an explainer underneath that says if space is limited and it's not practical to include this information at the location of the collection, if you've got a little tap to donate machine in the far corner of your bird sanctuary and there's only space to put, you are benefiting this the donations will benefit this organization, and here's our charity number. Then you should provide a short link to a web page containing those details, and it should be a very clear link. It's not just here is our website. It would be, St. Paul's Church /new roof to tell you how the new roof money would be used if you have a secondary purpose. But yeah, so that's the end of the examples. Yes, I am again conscious of time because I see there's probably a lot of questions coming in, but I'll just explain to you what we're going to be doing next. We launched the new code, the PDF format. We're in the implementation and engagement period, which means that we will be limiting the number of investigations that we do into potential breaches of the old code whilst we prepare for the new code. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for engagement. There's obviously sessions like this, where if you're going to use the feedback form at the end, we'll be able to take that information in and use it to shape how we produce more resources with relation to the new code. We already have upcoming resources on vulnerable circumstances, cashless donations, online gaming, social media, and events. And we can take the insights that we get from these sessions and consider how we should be presenting the information, whether that's through Q&As or whether that's through new guidance. And then come the 1st of November, the new code is in place. All fundraising activity from that date onwards will be subject to the new code and will be considered under the new rules. So what's that mean for you? We see on the final slide from me, what should you be doing? Obviously, you've come to one of these sessions, which is a great sign. You may not have had the time to read everything that we've put out, but certainly you'll want to read the code and the supporting documents, particularly as they relate to the sort of fundraising activity that you do. If you do a lot of events or you work with a lot of volunteers, obviously you'll make sure that those sections are, you're fully aware of what those sections say and what the requirements are. You can use the table of changes, as I said, to kind of look at, well, we used to use this rule to make our decisions about how we acted on events, but what's the new rule say about events? It'll tell you that through the table of changes. And then hopefully you'll also disseminate the information that you have got here and that you've got from your own research to key stakeholders. So for a lot of in a lot of organizations where there is dedicated fundraising staff, they'll need to communicate that to trustees, or you may be a trustee yourself, communicate that to the other trustees on the board. If you're in a large organization that has multiple fundraising teams, obviously you'll want your events team to know there's new events rules. And you'll want to think about how your fundraising partners, how some of the third-party organizations that you work with on fundraising will need to be aware of and prepared for the new code. And connected to that will be updating your processes to make sure that they're ready for what the new code says. So that, along with processes, I mean sort of wider documentation, so agreements with third parties, if they reference aspects of the code or reference keeping to a certain rule, make sure that that's ready and that reflects the new code. Scripts for telephone fundraisers, training materials for fundraisers, things like that may need to be updated to make people aware of what the new code sets out. And also, as I mentioned in my examples of bird sanctuaries and things, if you have static collection points, from my own informal observation, a lot of them are not currently meeting the standards that we set in the new code. So you would want to make sure that you do checks that your static collection points will be compliant once the new codes come into place. And one of the most useful things you can do, and hopefully the link to this will be shared in the chat, but also we have a QR code you could scan to sign up for our newsletter, where you'll get updates on when new guidance comes out, on what the timeline is for the code, some other sort of blogs and insights into what the purposes of certain guidance are, or maybe even case studies and things like that from other organizations who've been using it. So being signed up to a newsletter is the best way for you to make sure that you know what is coming and when, and are ready for the 1st of November. And I believe that is the end of my slides, so I will pass back to Amy, who will take us through the Q&A.
Hi everyone, I think we might have lost Amy through internet difficulties, but I'm happy to take on the Q&A if... Oh, Amy, are you back?
Oh my goodness. Thank you. I don't know if you've all noticed, but I've been being kicked in and out of this in the background. My internet decided that this was the best time to cut out. So thank you for bearing with me. I think I should be okay now, but I think Frankie's ready to jump in if I get kicked out again. But thank you so much, Connor, for the comprehensive overview there. I mean, there's so much more we could get into, I'm sure. There's plenty of questions coming in, and it's also great to see people swapping information in the chat. Great to see that peer support as well. So I'm going to pick up on as many questions as I can. Just please be aware that we have taken a note of all of these questions, and we'll make sure that Connor and the team get these, and these are used to kind of frame any further communications that's put out there as well, to make sure that all of your questions are answered, albeit not individually by Connor if we can't get them today. So, a couple of questions that I know Chanel has already answered in terms of, yes, this recording will be available, yes, these slides will be available, but a couple of questions that I think people were really keen to hear about. So, we don't fundraise directly from the public. We apply and get grants from other organizations. Do we need to register with the fundraising regulator, Connor?
Well, need is a strong word. It's a great thing to do to register with the Fundraising Regulator to show your commitment to appropriate fundraising. But if you spend less than £100,000 a year on fundraising, then you're not subject to the levy, and it is optional whether you choose to sign up for, I believe it's now £60 a year to use the badge. There's benefits of it, but if you do limited public fundraising, then obviously you'll get limited benefit in having the badge. There may be some grant makers who will want to know how you're regulated and how you show that commitment to that regulation. I don't want to say they'll look more favorably on you because you have the badge, because I've no way of knowing that. But certainly, if you can explain to them how you understand the code, then that would be enough. But yeah, there are rules specifically relating to how you would behave towards grant making trust. There are a limited number of rules in a section, which the number has changed, so I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, it's really up to you if there's a benefit in being able to show people who might be giving you money that you're committed to the code and the expectations in it. But even if you don't have the badge, you are subject to the code.
Thanks, Connor. So it's a kind of a linked question, actually. So is the fundraising code of practice just best practice rather than a legal requirement? And is it in terms of being registered? Can you elaborate on that a little?
So it is a complex thing. I'll try and cover it as briefly as possible. But it's very much akin to sort of advertising standards, where you're subject to fundraising activity is subject to these rules, whether or not somebody has signed up with us. And the self-regulatory system exists to try and address concerns about those issues in a kind of efficient and smooth manner without having to get to have legal intervention or involve statutory bodies. So if somebody chooses not to engage with the self-regulatory system, it may then have to be escalated to statutory authorities or referred to other bodies who have actual legal powers. So the idea of voluntary self-regulation applies in a lot of different sectors. I previously worked in advertising standards, which is why I would allude to that as the most familiar with. But essentially, yes, we set out what the expectations are and the aspiration of those expectations, but you are essentially expected to keep to those standards or you will have breached our code. And if you don't cooperate towards moving towards compliance, then there's a risk of referral to the Charity Commission, referral to the ICO if it's a data issue, referral to the Gambling Commission if it's about lotteries, things like that. We're the first line of regulation, and we are a lot easier to deal with.
I think this is a point that a lot of people are getting into a bit here. I'm just going to pick up on a few other questions that I think a few people have upvoted. Bearing in mind, you might not be able to answer now, Connor, but it's good to be aware of. Are there any changes to the wording around fundraising from people that you believe to be considered vulnerable? I know this is a hot topic.
Yes, there are. So that was one of the examples I considered actually including today, but as you saw, even with the number that I included, I overran on the time. But yes, we've reframed the rules on asking for funds from people in vulnerable circumstances. We've framed it under a new principle. We've also repositioned it. Currently, it appears in a sort of general standards thing, but instead we have a section specifically on working with children and people in vulnerable circumstances. And there's clarity there about what's expected from you. There's also clarity within the rule that you're not expected to be performing capacity tests on people who you're asking for money. That's completely unreasonable. But that you're taking steps to address it if it comes to your attention afterwards, or that your fundraisers are aware of signs to look out for people who might be particularly vulnerable. And as I mentioned briefly towards the end, there is some specific new guidance coming out on working with people in vulnerable circumstances. That'll be coming out during the implementation period. And if you sign up to our newsletter, you'll know exactly when, because unfortunately, I don't know exactly when.
I'm trying to kind of group some of these questions together now, Connor. I think quite a few questions in the chat as well around trying to make this onboarding process easier for new fundraising volunteers or staff or training who might need to understand the code. Do you have any additional materials that perhaps organisation could use when training volunteers or staff in this?
So at the moment, we're working on developing things about the new code where we don't call it new anymore. Come November, it's just the code. We don't need to say the code used to say this and now it says that. But the sensible thing to do is for a lot of the audiences of these will be people who know what the code currently says or know what their expectations are and explaining them what the new expectations will be. But towards the end of the implementation period and then after the 1st of November, we're going to be producing more resources specifically aimed at the public so they can understand what standards are expected generally in fundraising. We're also looking at putting together a short sort of basics for fundraisers document. So if this is your first interaction with the fundraising regulator, I regularly meet people at events who don't even know the fundraising regulator exists, let alone that they're subject to our regulations. And we're conscious of that, and we're going to find lots of different ways to provide those resources. And we are specifically going to target them at smaller organizations who don't necessarily have an entire fundraising compliance team that might be able to provide some of that insight in-house. Right. So we are aiming to make those resources targeted to the smaller organizations who might be first hearing about the fundraising regulator whenever somebody says, I've got a complaint.
Thanks, Connor. And in terms of kind of a joined up approach to providing you from our perspective, reaching out to your local infrastructure body as well, to kind of look at how you can approach this together with other local organizations to reduce
Yes,
that
and we've been doing
burden.
quite a bit of regional work for the code review because there's only so much we can do, but we are thinking about being specifically more region rather than devolved nation in our focus as well.
Great. loads of questions, Connor, about what are unstaffed donations. So is there an exhaustive list of what this might include? Some examples given here, which people weren't sure were online donations, unattended contactless giving devices. Is there
Yes, that's more the case. Yeah. So the code itself, I've obviously just pulled out the rules without all the contextual information. The code itself has the contextual information. But yeah, the biggest ones would be, if you go into whatever, you go into Stately Home and it's donate £5, tap this thing, or if you're at a supermarket and they have a roundup function, there's a specific rule that explains some of that things as well. But it's to say that if you have a partnership with the supermarket and they're offering people the chance to round up the last pound of their purchase for your organization, then they need to know the name of the organization and the charity number and how to contact them. They might need to know some stuff as well, depending on the nature of your relationship with the supermarket, about how the supermarket's managing that. And it would be useful to say that it's charityname.com/Tesco to find more information about this. So it is very, it's light touch. It's perfectly reasonable to say you should have your organization name, charity number, and a way to contact them if you're asking people to give you money. But it's more about consistency and setting that standard. The example I would often call on is the charity collection bins, where there'll be different methods. Some, you make a donation, say particularly like food banks, you make a donation and that donation in kind goes straight to the people in need. Other ones, you make a donation, it goes to a charity shop, they sell it, the money goes to the people in need. Other ones, you donate an old jacket, it gets bundled up with some other recycling, they weigh it, and they make a donation based on the tonnage. And for you as a donor, you should know where best to place your donation based on what it is. If you have something that's in good condition that you want to go straight to a beneficiary, then you donate it in one place. If you have a jacket that's not seen better days and you don't think anybody will get much value out of it, you can put it in the recycling thing, and somewhere and along the line, a charity will get some money out of it.
Okay. And really, people want to know about unstaffed collections. There's loads of questions about that. I've just tried to do some quick fire ones, I suppose. So QR codes were mentioned. Can the information be once you've clicked on the QR code, or does it need to be alongside it?
The name of the charity needs to be alongside it. There's the core information that needs to be at before they make the donation. Yeah, that needs to be alongside it. I mean, there might be some points of clarity on the impact of some of the specific mechanisms, but yeah, before they make the donation, and also just generally, it's not great to have just a mysterious QR code.
Well,
yeah, before the
Yeah.
point at which they make the donation, they need to be able to find this information, and
Right.
it's not advisable to just have a random QR code. But if it says scan here to find out how to donate, and you scan and it takes you to a page that contains the information, that should be fine.
Okay. Okay, great. You may have touched on this already, Connor, so I'm sorry if we're repeating ourselves, but there are a couple of questions around processing fees as well when taking card payments. I'm not sure if you'd be able to answer this.
Yeah, the fees aspect as well. It's more, this is kind of more about a level playing field compared to online platforms as well. People will understand that if there's a whatever 1.75% for every card transaction, is a third party receiving a fee as part of the processing, and that's expected to be explained in online fundraising platforms where they say often they'll have sliders and options and things, but some won't. Some will just say that every donation, there's a 50p processing fee added to every donation, and just making that clear. And although that is less common at the minute with things like tap to donate machines, we need to be ready for changes in the system. And certainly at an event I went to last year hosted by the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, there were at least 5 different organizations with stands saying we've got an amazing tap to donate machine, and they all had slightly different ways that they were getting a profit from it. And so that needs to be clear as well, just as it would be in any other context where there's a sort of additional top-up processing fee beyond just if you buy something by card in a charity shop, there's a processing fee there, but you're not expected to be informed of that.
Okay. So something additional
Yeah,
being
through
about that.
sort of yeah.
Okay. I'm just seeing if there's any quick ones I can go through now. I know there are some we haven't got to, but we have taken note of this. Without going into kind of really specific. Okay, when purpose of donation was being discussed, is that just for appeals or restricted donations or for how every donation will be spent? Does that make sense to you, Connor?
Yeah, if it's a restricted appeal, if you're raising funds for a restricted purpose, then you should be clear about what happens if you do or don't meet that standard. There's a lot more information in the code itself about secondary purposes, what they are, how you can manage the risk involved in doing a secondary purpose, and it links through to an article that we wrote a couple of years ago explaining here's a good way to manage the secondary purpose. So although I brought it up in relation to the rules about unstaffed collections, it applies in a whole range of contexts, and we provide a lot more detail within the code itself.
I'll just pick a final question because it's just linked to what we were talking about, processing fees. So just for further clarity, if someone makes a donation via the website of one of the charities on the call, do they then need to have an explanation of fees?
If there is a sort of extra third-party layer on top, which sometimes there is, if there's like a widget that's hosted, that's provided by another thing, and they'll take a cut of it. It's so a bit like the charity bin example. It's so people can figure out, I want to donate £20, and how much of my £20 makes it to the charity, or what's the best way that I can donate that £20 so that most of it makes it to the charity. And so there are contexts in which a donation page hosted on your website will be subject to that, but a lot of the time it won't be.
Thanks, Connor. I think people are quite keen to have a couple of questions answered about in aid of volunteers, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer, but let's go for it. So, in aid of volunteers who want us to promote their fundraising attempts, or when we want to celebrate their fundraising, do we then become liable for their fundraising activity?
That's unlikely. This is another area where we're thinking of producing some different types of guidance, maybe even like a kind of flowchart type thing of saying, if you do X, Y, and Z, it's on behalf of, but if you do this, it's in aid of. And actually, I believe that appears in one of the upcoming guidance documents that we're putting out. So yeah, we're aware that it's something that people are interested in, but yeah, just saying, really excited for that Amy's running the marathon tomorrow is not deciding. Well, I hope you're not at this point, but is not the same as being involved in setting up your campaign, or finding somebody who's a popular online personality and getting them to run like a 24-hour streaming event where they get the messaging out about your organization and they use your branding and all this other stuff. Yeah, just using your branding or doing some low key promotion of your campaign is not going to turn somebody into on behalf of. And especially once it's finished, obviously, like congratulating people on your social media to say you did an amazing job and you raised this much money. That the activity is over. They were an aid of fundraiser or an aid of volunteer throughout the process. And just to be clear as well, the new code defines a fundraiser in a way that excludes in aid of volunteers. So the rules that relate to in aid of volunteers relate to in aid of volunteers, and the rules that relate to fundraisers, as defined in the code, do not relate to in aid of volunteers. So it's made much clearer. So it should be easier to tell which rules are specifically the ones you have to consider when working with in aid of volunteers.
I think any additional guidance on that, as you mentioned, Connor, is going to be so helpful. I know that's an area of confusion for lots of organizations who come to us as well. There was another question on that which may well be covered by the guidance, and they might be best going to that, Connor, but it was just about if a group uses your venue to raise funds in aid of an organization and uses their ticketing system. Does that change things?
I would have to look into that, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. I am going to kind of draw the Q&A to a close there because we're running out of time a little bit. And I hopefully managed to give a bit of a good overview of the types of questions we had in there. I know we didn't get to everything, but like I say, those are noted. They're not just gonna go off into the ether. If we could just get the final slides up, please, before everyone needs to jump off. Fantastic. Is that my last? Yeah, okay. So just before everyone needs to leave, it would be fantastic if you would be happy to fill in our Snap feedback poll, which Chanel will get up now. 2 questions, which help us to build on our webinars and make sure that what we're delivering to you is indeed useful and something that you can apply in your role. So do scroll down because there are 2 questions there. And if you've got to jump off, would be so grateful if you could just quickly fill this in before you go. And there will also be a longer survey that opens up when you close the session, which has some questions specific to... Oh, just go back to the slide, please. Which has some questions specific to the code and whether this has increased your understanding of it or indeed of the support that is available to help you to navigate the changes to the code. We're just going to end that poll because I think nearly everyone has participated, which is fantastic. And just my final slides. So I'm not going to run through this in too much detail, and we will include this in the follow-up. We've put some links in the chat throughout, including to the new landing page for the Fundraising Code of Practice, and you can download a version of it there. We also provide guidance on funding and income on our website, including kind of all the different fundraising methods that would be covered in the code. I've also put a link there to the Charity Commission's guidance on charity fundraising, which goes alongside this. And I wanted to make you aware of upcoming NCVO events and training that would complement this as well. So we do run a training session on successful funding applications. And as you may be aware, Small Charity Week is coming up at the end of June. And we are covering the theme of financial resilience and sustainability as the umbrella topic for the week. And within that, we are running a free webinar on top tips to create an effective fundraising strategy, which my colleague Frankie, who's been sharing the slides today, will be chairing. Alongside that, for NCVO members, we'll be running a peer knowledge exchange where you can swap top tips and talk through challenges together around trust fundraising in the current challenging climate. Next slide. And there are some notes here on how to get in touch with the Fundraising Regulator. They've got a dedicated email address for any questions around the code. You can also follow them on LinkedIn and on X. And the website is there at the bottom as well. There are plenty of resources to explore on that webpage. And don't worry because you will get a recording of this webinar and the slides as well. So just finally, and actually we're on time. A big thank you to all of you who've joined us today. Thank you for sticking with us to the end. And hopefully you've learned something you can apply to your fundraising practice today. Go away and make sure you read the code and the resources that we send in our follow-up. Thank you to Connor and Rebecca from the Fundraising Regulator who have supported us with this webinar today. And thank you to my colleagues, Frankie and Chanel, for helping it to run smoothly. And hopefully you didn't notice me disappearing on and off too many times. And that's just a QR code on the screen there to tell you a bit more about NCVO membership if you're not already a member and you might be interested in finding out more. Remember, it's free if your income is under £30,000, and we do have a Small Charity Week special offer for small organisations up to £500,000 annual turnover, which is detailed on the Small Charity Week website, which we can put in the chat now. Thank you for coming. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your week and have a fabulous bank holiday weekend. Thank you, everyone.